Hello, Internet. I'm Corey Ohm, your witch in residence here on YouTube. And there are some very cool things coming up. And when cool things start coming up, the movie that I initially start looking at as my kind of comfort food movie is Gone in 60 Seconds. Now, before I get too deep into it, I would just like to thank my channel members who have been absolutely amazing. I'd also like to thank everybody who subscribed to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you still haven't subscribed, I still have plenty of room in my heart for you. Please go ahead and click that subscribe button. It really helps the channel. I do a recorded video every Sunday, and every other Thursday we have our, I'm going to call it woo-woo show, where we cover all kinds of topics from aliens to government conspiracies to all kinds of stuff. It's called the Rogue Council. I invite you out. Now, with all of that being said, and that obligatory ritual being over, let's take a look at Gone in 60 Seconds. Now, whenever I watch this movie, I of course watch it for the cars, right? And I've always been a fan of movies where the characters seem very, very smart and, you know, kind of have their own moral code about how to go about things. And one of the things that I really love about this movie is when Nicolas Cage's character realizes that in order to save his younger brother, he's going to have to steal cars. He says, I have to make a trip first. And he goes and he visits his mom. And his mom asks how much trouble his little brother's in, and he says a lot. And she asks if he can get him out of it, and he says yes, but it's going to require doing things that I promised you I wouldn't do anymore. And she gives him permission. And it made me think about an interesting discussion. When is it okay to break a promise? So, when we look at this, I figure there are a couple of guideposts we can use to make this determination. To me, the first one is probably the most sensical reason. And I'm actually going to borrow a page out of the Hebrew Bible. And one of the big core tenets is you're allowed to break just about any one of the laws, provided somebody's life is on the line. And that, I think, is a pretty good rule overall, right? If you have to violate a no trespassing sign to save somebody, or you have to run onto the subway tracks to get somebody else off of them, I think that's acceptable. And I think all of us would agree that that's acceptable, even though technically it is trespassing, and living in a civilized society, we've all promised effectively to follow the rules. I would also argue that certain laws against, say, hurting someone, you know, provided you're using violence to stop another person from getting permanently injured, I think is a reasonable use of force. And I mean, so long as you limit it to preventing the person from causing the other person more harm, I think that's okay. I also believe that, you know, if you promised someone, you know, you wouldn't go down to the river, but you're going down to that river to save someone's life, I think that's acceptable. So those are a couple of examples. And using the argument of, look, somebody else's life was on the line and I couldn't stand by, I had to try to help that person, I think is a reasonable place. But there's got to be other places that we can look at, and other promises we can look at that are promises, but also in situations where we can discuss this. Now, I think one of the other positions that it's fairly okay, in my opinion, to break a promise within reason is promises made under duress. So you're kind of forced into this situation. Um, I would also argue that there should be a sort of limitation on promises made while you are still under the age of consent. Hear me out on this. If you were to say promise your parents that while you were in college, all you were going to do is study when you were like, I don't know, 12 years old, that's not a promise that can really hold up later in life. Okay? It's, just going to school to study is not practical. But you would have made it at a time when you didn't actually have all the information to properly make that kind of promise. So I think there needs to be a little bit of an excuse, a little bit of opening for that. And then I think the third situation where it's okay to break a promise is if it's something beyond your control. Okay? Now, when I say beyond our control, let me give two examples. The first one is you promise to meet somebody to work on your project, and you can't go because your friend showed up and he has tickets to a baseball game and you decide to go. I don't think that's an okay excuse. But if you're supposed to meet somebody, you promise you're going to meet them, and police show up at your door and do not allow you to leave because they have very important questions for you or something along those lines, I think that is an acceptable scenario where it is okay to break your promise. Because while technically the promise is broken, you didn't have control over the situation. And I think that is an acceptable time. And in the movie, our main protagonist has promised that he is going to be giving up his life of crime because he's seen friends, shot at. He's seen friends go to jail. He's seen friends wind up having their lives destroyed. And he decides that's not what he wants for him. And he didn't want to drag his younger brother into it. And that's a reasonable reason to make a promise. And I think if you're going to have to break a promise for any other than for any of the reasons I've listed above, the other reason to is if you have to break a promise, go to the person that you made the promise to and discuss it. Because if they understand the reason why you're doing it and they give their consent for it, I think that is a very, very reasonable place to be. Okay? So, what's the takeaway here? If you're going to have to break a promise like that, go to the person you made the promise to and discuss it. And if you made the promise to yourself, sit down and really think about it before you choose to do it. And ask yourself why you're doing it. And why is there this urgent need? Is it for selfish reasons or selfless ones? If the reasons are selfless, if there's an altruistic reason beyond just my intentions are good, then I think it's an okay thing to do. And I would recommend in those situations that if you can find justification that not just you, but those who will judge your actions in the future would find reasonable and acceptable given the circumstances, then I would consider moving forward. And it's a hard one, right? When we watch in the movie, in the moment, Nicolas Cage's character is enjoying himself, right? He's back to doing what he did for fun as a kid, which was steal cars. He enjoys this world, this game of shadows, if you will, where the cops are just a few steps behind him and they're always on the move, and it's all just, knowledge, skill, and adrenaline, and he gets wrapped up in it. But he also has the wherewithal to acknowledge that this can't be forever. We cannot continue to live this life, because while it's fun in the moment, terrible things can happen, right? We see one member of the crew get shot. We see others chased by cops. We see a third group get harassed by other gangs. It's a dangerous world. And he got out for the right reasons. And he came back in to save his brother, which I would argue is a very, very good reason. This is one that's hard to stick with and hard to justify. Because, we could sit there and we could probably justify anything to ourselves. It takes a lot more work and a lot more effort to justify something to someone who isn't you. So I would suggest, if you're ever in this kind of moral dilemma, find someone that you care about and that cares about you and talk it out. Okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. It doesn't necessarily have to be a friend. It can be anyone who you have confidence in that will treat you with respect. But discuss it. Because when we make decisions and rationalize them ourselves, we can rationalize just about anything. That's the power and wonder and danger of logic in a vacuum. But when we stop and we really discuss it with someone that we care about and that cares about us, we're going to get feedback that we may not like. We may hear, no, look, this is a bad plan. Even if it's for the right reasons, this isn't what you should be doing. Or they could come back and say, yes, you absolutely do need to do this. And I would still think about it a little more. I've had situations come up where I've had to break promises because of forces beyond my control. And when that's happened, I've discussed it with people and made sure that I was not doing it just because it was convenient or easy or fun, but because it had to be done, because it was the right thing to do. And if you're in that situation, I think it's also important to remember that, yes, while in the moment it can be fun and you can allow yourself to enjoy yourself in the moment, at the end of it, you have to shut that down. And you have to acknowledge that this is not going to be the way things are going forward, because those promises were made for a reason. And even if the reason doesn't apply in this unique circumstance, it does still apply. So we need to think carefully about that, because at the end of the day, we are judged on our word. Now more than ever with the way the internet is, right? We put something on the internet, it stays forever. We don't intentionally put something on the internet, it could still be on the internet forever. This is an important lesson. This is something important to think about. So I encourage you to think about this, to focus on this, and to really consider, pause and reflect before you make a drastic change in your life that could result in not great things, okay? Remember why you made those promises. Make sure that the articles of those promises are still valid. And always be ready to test yourself against the questions that reality is going to throw at you, because, look, the universe is going to throw things at you that you didn't expect. And 5 to 10 years later, when you've made an arrangement on something, the universe may still try to test you. Do you have the mental fortitude to live up to those tests? Do you have the courage and the willpower to live up to your promises? I can't answer that for you. That's something you're going to have to answer. But I believe you have the capability to make that answer. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming out and watching the video. I do these every Sunday morning, and my channel members get to see them sometimes a little early. So thank you once again. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.